When you're tuned to A440 standard tuning, then it turns out that your F sharp, the pitch within the A440 scale, is a 741 hertz pitch, which is one of those notes that is of nature. The creator created it. It's one of the fundamentals in the perfect circle of sound, but it was selected by the Rockefeller Foundation out of military research that would cause the most stress and psychosocial dissonance and even, quote, mass hysteria. And it was acoustic weaponry or acoustic warfare and ultimately spiritual warfare because, again, spirituality is energy and that's frequency. So your F sharp pitch in the A440 standard tuning is 741. Now, alternatively to that, when you tune up to A444, now your C becomes 528. So 528 is the C pitch within the 444 hertz A scale. So that's confusing. It's hard to wrap your head around that concept. And here's another one. When all of your notes are, let's say, tuned to A440, that means your F sharp at 741 is actually within the A440 scale. So in other words, if you were to tune your entire instrument to the A444, your C is actually engaged in the 444 scale, but you can play music in 528 in C, and essentially then the entire thing is in 528. Does that make sense?
I'm hearing you're talking specifically about C and F sharp in there, and the two together make the devil's triangle, the devil's chord.
Yeah.
And is that part of what you're talking about here?
Well, I'm glad that you brought that up. No, that wasn't what I was talking about, but it's really good for you to bring that up because, again, that's what I'm looking at. Again, I don't have all the answers. I have a lot of questions myself, and all I'm looking at are the facts, and I'm trying to make sense of them like you are. And yes, indeed, in musicology, the two notes played together, that is 741 and 528, create such dissonance. That's the most destructive energy. Now, philosophically, theologically, this is a vitally important issue because if you realize that God created all the math and all the numbers, including these frequencies, you realize that we, the people, again, are given choice. We have a choice to listen to the A440 standard tuning, but at least we should be given the awareness that when you play A440 and your 741 goes into F sharp, or your F sharp is 741, what that creates is a block on your heart and all the chakras below your heart, and it stimulates the pineal gland, and it stimulates the consciousness where we celebrate the God of science and the gods of medicine, the medical deities, this rational egocentrism of this left brain orientation versus the right brain or the heart mind, the difference between the two. It's a choice that we have to make, and it's the musicians now who are now suddenly being educated to realize the history of the institutionalization of the of simply going up to A444, which is a significant difference. When you think of, for example, when you're listening to radio, you, let's say, dialed into 99.6, and if you just go to 99.7, you no longer hear the music. You no longer hear anything but static, and that static is annoying. And if you keep listening to it, it's sickening, and ultimately it'll kill you if you continue to listen to it. That's now 1/10 of a hertz. We're talking about 40 times that. going from A440 up to 444, it's a 40-time difference in that sense, and it's significant. And spiritually, it affects your heart significantly different. So we need a miracle. The miracle frequency has been determined. That's the do, re, mi note of the original solfeggio. That's 528. And we now know that that stimulates the greenish yellow heart chakra. In essence, it balances it, it opens it. You know, you can't harm anyone with love. That's the beauty of it. So you can play a lot of music in 528, and, you know, some of my critics, and I think crazy critics, would say, well, if you get too much love, if you get too much 528 or too much heart stimulation, that might be bad for you. Well, gee whiz, I think what the world needs now is a lot of love. And so I don't think that we're at risk of causing too many problems by playing love or bringing people the awareness that if you tune your instrument to this frequency, you have an opportunity to transcend this demonic engagement and direction of our music, this devil's tone of F sharp, which is a diminished fifth. It's an augmented fourth. I guess it's called a tritone in some circles. This is destructive in a sense, but it is of God. There is destructive forces operating in nature. And again, we the people have got to be educated and make an educated choice about what frequency we want to tune to. You know, love versus fear.
Okay. Yeah, you've been talking about the 528 hertz as a specific vibration. There's also talk about the solfeggio scale, and I've heard that the 9 tones of the solfeggio scale, and that each one of those 9 fits into a triad of three triads. How do those tones correlate to the current paradigm in Western civilization of a scale of 8 tones or 13 half tones between do up to do?
Well, I don't think that they correlate well. If you look at Tesla technology and what Tesla taught his students, including John Keeley, Raymond Rife, it's the same thing that Aristotle, Vitruvius, Plato, Da Vinci, that they knew that there was something special about 3s, 6s, 9s, and 8s. So I don't know enough to criticize the octave, but I know that in God's musical matrix, it's a 9 scale, and I know that we have a perfect circle of sound that represents these sacred matrix creationistic tones. But if you were to try to tune your instrument to each of those, like if you said, okay, well, I'm going to take, let's say, C and make it 528, and then D 639 and E 741, it's not going to be harmonic. It won't be melodic. It'll sound weird, and I urge people not to even engage 741 while you're playing around with 528, because we've had reports of some destructive occurrences occurring to energy devices. So we discourage the use of 741 when we're experimenting in music here. The way in which the musicians thus far have been advancing this music, I think, relates to what we're talking about with the triads. You mentioned the central triads that the classical musicians talked about and then seem to have forgotten. In modern music, they don't talk too much about central triads. But when you look at the perfect circle of sound, you see, for example, there's 396, 639, and 963 as a central triad. And I can tell you that the work of Victor Showell, who's a mathematics genius, who studied the Saqqara pyramids and the mathematics of the sacred geometry of the pyramids of Giza and its relationship to cosmology, and found that 3 596 is a solid foundation in that structuring. And likewise was 528. 741 was related also, but in a different way, according to Showell's work. But the reason I mention this is because the 396 central triad is very angelic. It has a quality to it that is noticeably different when you tune to it versus the same instrument tuned to 528 or 741. You know, when I first started to experiment with these central triads, I found that the 396 was angelic and tingly feeling. It was like perfect for meditation music and healing music, it seemed. And then when we evaluated the 528, 285, 852 central triad, those frequencies seem to be more along the lines of jazz or folk rock, light rock. But then when we wanted to have real hard rock and roll, it's interesting because that's where the A440 standard tuning, which involves 741 and then has a central triad relationship to 174 and 417. And so there's a difference in quality, and then the musicians are, again, experimenting. I think we need to have a research institute that is dedicated to advancing this kind of research, because I'd love for one to be more knowledgeable, and that's the only way we're going to be able to do it. You know, we've had a lot of people now internationally that are reading this material, integrating it. I urge everyone to get a copy of the Book of 528 as soon as possible and integrate that in your knowledge base, and that will help a tremendous amount, not only to give you faith about what it is that we're talking about, but also potential for directions in creationism, recreating ourselves, recreating our planet, because again, this is the creative technology. It's 9 core creative frequencies that we're talking about here. And again, you can choose love or you can choose fear. And, you know, it's a matter of what are we going to do next? Research is certainly important. Research and development, R&D.
Can you tell me the name of the book again?
Yes, it's called The Book of 528.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Diane, have you got a question for Len?
Dr. Horowitz, you have talked a lot about the 528 hertz frequency as the love frequency. Have you looked at other frequencies that perhaps might instill the opposite in people? I'm thinking, for example, of the heavy metal and the other music that young people listen to and are often put into situations where they turn into angry young people. Have you found a direct correlation with this?
Yes, that's what I was alluding to. So let me get into a little bit more depth. Here's the history of where the music has gone, where it is right now. In 1939, based on research that was conducted in Princeton, New Jersey at the Princeton Radio Project, that was a organization that was being administered by Abraham Flexner, which is an infamous name in medicine, because in the United States, it was the Flexner Report and Abraham Flexner's bogus research that stated to Congress fraudulently that medicine, drug-based healing, is the only legitimate